I just found my wife outside. I'm sitting here freaking out. It's 3:17 a.m. and I just found my wife outside. This is going to be a mess as I'm still shaking, but let me explain it as best I can. So, a bunch of years ago we lived in another house. One night I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard noises coming from the other half of the house. I quietly opened the bedroom door and immediately saw a light on in my wife's study, which was situated next to the kitchen. The house we lived in was a few blocks away from the bad neighborhood, so my immediate thought was that someone had broken in and was going through the stuff in my wife's room, as my wife had come to bed with me several hours prior, and as far as I knew, she was still in bed. I crept through the house and was ready to confront the person in the room when I realized that it was my wife. In my still half-asleep state, I just assumed she was still in bed. Turns out she had woken up, couldn't get back to sleep, and so went to her room to browse Facebook or whatever for a while. I had almost confronted my own wife thinking she was a burglar. Now, in our current house, we have a screen door and a wooden door. The wooden door has a deadbolt on it, and you have to make sure that you take the house keys with you, because if you close the wooden door, you're not getting back in unless you grab the hidden spare key or knock on the door window to be let back in. So it's about an hour ago I'm woken up by the front door rattling. I immediately grab my phone and pull up the security camera located right by the front door. To my surprise, I see my wife standing there, kind of shivering. It's definitely her because we've been married for over a decade, and I know what my own wife looks like. She's dressed in the same clothing she wore today, a red top and black pants. 100% her. I don't know what she's doing outside, but she is. Confused, I roll over and there's my wife fast asleep. Remembering the incident in our last place, I use my phone screen to shine a light on her and confirm that it's definitely her and she's definitely in bed. At this point, I'm really confused. I get up and make my way through the house to the front door. As I walk into the lounge room, our cat looks up at me, half asleep. Normally she's super curious about stuff going on outside, and I would have thought that hearing the screen door rattling would have caused her to be at the door trying to see what's going on. But it's as if she hasn't heard a thing. I stand by the door and call out, "Who is it?" "It's me. Hurry up and let me back in, I'm freezing." I went outside because I heard something but forgot to take the keys in my bag with me. That absolutely sounds like my wife. Accent, intonation, knowledge about where her set of keys are, everything. But I'm not convinced, because I've just seen her sleeping in the bed with my own eyes. "Hold on a second," I tell her. Now, I'm heading back through the house and into the bedroom. I wake up my wife and say, "This is really fucking weird. You have to see this." I open the camera app and show her the front door. She's still at the door, looking around, wondering what I'm doing because all I need to do to let her back in is turn the handle on the deadbolt and open the door. My wife says, "What the fuck? When was that recorded?" I tell her it's not. This is life. You're standing outside by the front door. I just went down there and asked who it was, and your voice told me it was you, and that I should let you back in because you're freezing and you left your keys in your bag. My wife gets up and peers through the bedroom window. As you can just see the front door alcove from there. She gasps and pulls the curtain shut. She turns around and I'll never forget the look on her face as long as I live. She's terrified. "That's me," she says. At this point, I'm freaked the fuck out. I'm wide awake. I'm speaking to my wife and I'm physically touching her while trying to peer out the window with her. But there she is, standing outside in the very outfit she wore today. Same hair, same glasses, same everything. We walk into the lounge room, and I grab the big torch I have. It's a big, sturdy metal, super bright light, great for blinding people and hitting them if they get too close. We stand by the door again. "What's your name?" I ask. She tells me her full name, including her middle name. It's correct. "What's your birth date?" She tells me. It's also correct. "What did we have for dinner tonight?" She tells me this too and tells me that I cooked it. This is right too. I can hear my real wife standing next to me, trying to control her breathing as she's scared out of her wits. I nudge her and whisper, "Ask her something only you would know." After a moment to steady herself and think of something, she speaks. When we last stayed with my parents, what change had Dad made to my old room? There was a pause. Who is that? The person outside said. Why aren't you letting me in? You know it's me. You're starting to freak me out here. Who is that inside with you? Is that a recording of me? What's going on here? I said, answer the question. What change had been made to your room when we last visited? Another pause. Then finally, there was a second bed added, as Max and Damien, my brother-in-law's two kids, sleep in there while visiting Mom and Dad. There's an audible gasp from my wife next to me. Now we're both freaked out. I grab her hand, lead her back into the bedroom, and turn the lights on. We're still awake, watching the cameras. The other person walked towards the backyard, presumably to grab the spare key, but that was about 40 minutes ago, and I haven't seen them since. I'm too shit scared to go to bed, because I'm scared that this person, who knew everything about my wife, will find the spare key and enter. I don't know who the fuck they really are or what they want, but I'm not sleeping. My father's cabin in the woods burned down. We found something strange in the ruins. So my father used to own a cabin. In fact, he used to own a lot of different properties, which I suppose is just a roundabout way of saying that we grew up with money. Where things get a bit complicated is how he actually made that money. The line that he constantly fed us was that he was an accountant running his own firm in an office in the city. Long hours, lots of business trips. We never saw him much. And whenever we did, he always seemed tired, his eyes perpetually bloodshot, as if he were always trying to force them to stay open. He was sent off to prison right after I'd finished my first year of college. The sentence? 15 years for washing hundreds of millions of dollars for numerous cartels. 2 weeks after he'd been booked, my mother committed suicide. As it turns out, she'd been helping him out through the entire thing and was facing some time herself. I guess she didn't want to deal with all that and took the drastic way out. A few months later, the government had seized pretty much all his property. All of it. Except for that cabin in the woods. It took a long time for me to feel normal again. But eventually I managed it. Went back to school and graduated with a good enough GPA, which allowed me to snag some shitty office job a few months later. But it was enough to pay the bills. Fast forward about another year, and I've basically scrubbed that entire sequence of events out of my brain. It took a little bit of therapy and a lot of psychedelics, but I finally did it to the point where I was comfortable enough to go back to that cabin. The one place where I'd see my father for more than a few weeks at a time during our summer trips. I decided to take along 3 of my friends from uni: Jack, Pedro, and Randy. We drove down there at the beginning of May. The road leading to the cabin hadn't been maintained at all, and as a result, it had become borderline undrivable. I decided to save my vehicle the stress and parked in a nearby lot, leaving us about a 1.5 mile trek through the woods, which really wasn't so bad. Our time in the cabin was pretty much spent getting drunk and stoned, and by the 3rd night we had completely run out of food. We decided to take the 30-minute walk over to the nearest rest stop, where I knew that there was a 24/7 diner. So we go there, eat our meals, and on the way back we notice a burning smell in the woods, as if there was a bonfire raging about nearby. Of course, that was a bit strange given that it was around 2 a.m., but we didn't think too much of it at the time, and we kept walking. It was only when the smell continued to grow stronger as we got closer to the cabin that we understood something was very wrong. Soon it had become suffocating, and we could see the night sky tinged with orange in the near distance. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, and immediately I was sprinting, my worst fear realized as I reached the clearing where the cabin was located. Completely up in flames, plumes of dark smoke blending in with the night. It was a mix of different emotions that hit me all at once, the combination of them creating a sense of dread, so deep I hadn't thought it possible. After reeling myself in, I called 911, with the operator telling me that the fire department would be on their way, but wouldn't be able to reach us for at least 30 minutes. The 4 of us walked away from the cabin in silence, getting far enough so that the smoke was no longer scratching at our throats. Around 10 minutes later, we noticed that the orange tinge in the sky had suddenly disappeared. And I mean suddenly. Like, gone in a single blink. I thought I might have been hallucinating, but it was clear from their expressions that my friends were seeing something similar. Cautiously, we started making our way back towards the cabin, noticing that the smoke was no longer heavy in the air, having cleared up considerably. Once we reached the clearing, it had disappeared altogether. I looked ahead, my brain working overtime to comprehend the sight before me. The cabin was no longer on fire. Burned to a crisp, sure, but the raging, overwhelming flames that had been consuming it just minutes prior had somehow completely fizzled out. The four of us looked at each other, as if to confirm we were all still seeing the same thing. Using the flashlight on my phone to survey the damage, I found pretty much what I'd expected. Complete destruction. Absolutely zero hope of recovering anything. I started taking some deep breaths, trying to calm myself down when I heard Pedro yelling out from the other side. Guys, where the fuck did this thing come from? We all walked over to him. Nestled in the debris was the corpse of something, a monstrosity. It was about the size of a bear, with the sections of its body that weren't burnt showing pale, clammy skin with deep cuts etched throughout it, in what looked to be some kind of crude pattern. Its head had been smashed in, leaving nothing but an abnormally wide bottom jaw, which was still bearing long, black teeth. It had an uncountable number of long, thick arms that it was using to hold something that resembled a human infant, one that appeared to be completely unscathed, devoid of any burn marks. The longer I stared at it, the more I was convinced I could see it breathing. It was a bizarre enough sight to put us into a near trance. What eventually snapped us out of it was the chanting. It was barely noticeable at first, slowly escalating in pitch, until it was clear that there were several human voices shouting in unison. Their tones were animalistic, their words strung together with just the bare beginnings of a rhythm. It sounded like they were speaking English, though I could hardly make out anything they were saying. The strangest part, though, was how quickly it was getting closer to us. Definitely not a walking pace. It was more like a sprint. The four of us shared a quick glance with each other, and immediately there was an understanding. We ran like bats out of hell, tripping over branches, our own feet. But eventually, we reached my car, all of us scrambling to pile into it. As I was fumbling for my keys, the chanting had become deafening, to a point that hardly made sense. It sounded as if there were speakers lined up in a circle around us, all blasting that horrible noise. And the second that I had put the keys into the ignition, things went silent. I found myself holding my breath as I looked up, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness until what I was seeing was unmistakable. Several figures standing completely still at the edge of the woods, all human-shaped but far too large to be people. All the air being held in my lungs flooded out with one big exhale, and I slammed the vehicle into drive and took a sharp turn before speeding the hell out of there, refusing to look in the rear view until we had made it into the highway. I drove until I had reached the rest stop, which was now hosting an absurd number of police cars. I parked, got out, and approached one of the cops, asking if they were there because of the fire. The cop shook his head. Fire? No. Has there been a fire? I explained the situation with the cabin to him, deciding to leave out the creature and the chanting for the time being. The cop nodded slowly, his expression remaining largely the same throughout. All right, he said. We'll look into it, and then give you an update in the morning. For tonight, just get a hotel or something. We exchanged numbers and I thanked him. As I began to walk away, he called out to me. Hey, can I ask you something? I turned back around. Yeah, I said. Sure. Do you happen to be my dad's name? His son. For a while, I just stared at him. Eventually, I nodded. Yeah, he said. I thought I recognized you. I don't understand, I told him. I've never seen you before. The cop took a deep breath before taking a quick look around. Come here, he said. Come close. Tentatively, I did so. I can't tell you everything. I don't even know everything. But I think you should have the right to know the truth about your father. All of the stuff that's happened here tonight. All of the shit that you've seen. It has something to do with him. He took another look around before continuing. Cartels, right? Was that the story they told you? It's not so creative. But I guess it doesn't have to be creative to be believable. Caused the shit that he was actually mixed up in. You would not believe unless you've seen it for yourself. What the hell are you talking about? I asked. Look, I have your number. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning. This is something I'm curious about as well. Maybe you can give me some answers and point me in the right direction. But not here. So get out of here before people start noticing you. And stay safe. I didn't feel like staying in a hotel that night, so I drove back into the city, dropping everybody off before arriving back at my own apartment. Of course, I couldn't sleep that night. My eyes wired open into the morning as I waited for the officer to call. He still hadn't by the time that noon rolled around, so I tried calling him instead. No answer. Yes, sir. Eventually, I did receive a call from the police, telling me that my father's cabin had burned down and that it was due to a forest fire. I told them that wasn't possible because there had been no forest fire and that I suspected foul play and wanted it to be investigated. It's already been investigated are the exact words that the officer told me. Don't worry about it. Just get in touch with insurance. Go over your options. And before I could say anything else, he had hung up on me. It was a mixture of anger and curiosity that compelled me to drive back down there. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't for the road leading towards the rest stop to be blocked altogether. There were 2 cop cars guarding the barrier, with a single officer signaling any vehicles approaching to turn around. I pulled over to the side of the road, and after some careful deliberation, I decided to get out and approach him and ask what was going on, just to see what he might say. When I finished the question, he stared at me for a long time. Uncomfortably long. Emergency construction is what he eventually told me. After that encounter, I pretty much dropped trying to figure things out. Some weird things have started happening to me since. Every night, I swear I can hear a baby crying in the apartment across from mine. The apartment that I thought had been occupied by a pair of college kids who definitely do not have children. That cop that was supposed to call me finally did, a few nights ago. When I answered, I was met with dead silence on the other end. Nearly 30 seconds of it until the line clicked dead. There's an abandoned house sitting across the street from my apartment building. One that's supposedly been there for years, because the development of the store meant to take its place keeps getting delayed. Somebody has started staring at me through its second-floor window. Whenever I catch them doing it, they're quick to close the blinds so I can never catch any details. But I know that the moment I turn away from it, their eyes are back on me. I can't confirm that any of these things are related, whether it has anything to do with my father. I just know that I don't want to deal with it, and that I want it to end. I had to fire someone. She was not happy about it. You're fired. Those 2 dreaded words are the last thing anyone wants to hear. As the manager of a small coffee shop, they're the last words I ever wanted to say. But unfortunately, I did have to say them. And the employee on the receiving end was less than pleased. Seriously, Kala? Robbie comes in 20 minutes late every shift, and I'm the one getting canned. It's not fair. I won't accept that. Claire, Robbie has 1 leg. He gets a pass. You took cash from the register. That's not something we can turn a blind eye to, I said, crossing my arms. Claire pursed her lips, shifting her gaze to the ground momentarily, before scowling at me once again. It was only $50. I needed the money for rent, and I said I'd pay it back. Please, Kala. I need this job. I'll put $100 back in the register on payday. Give me a second chance. I let out a deep sigh. She wasn't taking this well. I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do. Aftermath has a zero-tolerance policy for theft. Even if you were to pay it back, the big boss still wouldn't excuse it. I would be putting my own job in jeopardy by looking the other way, and that's just not something I can afford to do. Your actions have consequences, Claire. You brought this on yourself. She glanced up at me with teary eyes. Though Claire was entirely in the wrong, my heart shattered for her all the same. She was a good kid, just a little misguided. Or so I thought. I won't forget this, Calla. Mark my words, I will make you pay, she spat, before dramatically stomping out the door. My eyes grew wide, and my heart began to race. If any normal human being had said that, I would have blown it off entirely. But there's a little oddity about my job that I may have purposely forgotten to mention. You see, I'm a clairvoyant of sorts. I work at a coffee shop for the dead, and they tend to take things a lot more personally than the living. A gruff-looking man with a leather jacket and ripped jeans leaned against the counter, snapping my attention away from the door. He had an unkempt beard and a nasty road rash seared into his face. The shades obscuring his eyes exuded an air of confidence that he had no business possessing. Even so, his appearance didn't intimidate me in the slightest. Don't worry about her, Calla. She's talking out of her ass. I appreciate the reassurance, Frank. I know she probably just needs to blow off some steam, but it always freaks me out when shit like that happens. No offense to all you dead folk, but I don't want to kick the bucket anytime soon. Yeah, no. That's fair. Purgatory ain't that bad, but it doesn't hold a candle to the land of the living. By the way, if you get a chance, can you whip me up my regular? I could use a boost. Sure thing. Coming right up. Is there anything else I can get for why I tried my best to stop myself, but it was too late? I knew better than to ask that question to Frank. Yeah, he grinned, leaning in closer. Don't you say it. Frank, I swear if you, I'll take your soul. I glowered at him as he roared with laughter. Come on, Calla. Have a sense of humor, he wheezed, tears welling in his eyes. Frank, you have told me that same joke every chance you get for the entire time I've been working here. It wasn't funny the first time you said it, and it's definitely not funny now. I ought to charge you double every time you tell it. He frowned at me before turning to his normal booth. Geez, would it kill ya to lighten up a bit? Buzzkill. As I was beginning to prepare Frank's blonde espresso, I heard the familiar chime of the door opening. A kid with disheveled blonde hair and scratches across his face hobbled inside, leaning on a crutch. Hey, Robbie. Nice of you to show up, I beamed, flashing him a warm smile. I glanced down at my watch. 20 minutes late, right on the nose. Always gotta give me shit, huh, Mrs. Calla? You try hopping to work one day, then we'll talk, he quipped, returning a grin. Yeah, know what? Maybe I'll take you up on that offer. I froze, mid-sentence. All the color drained from my face, and I suddenly found myself unable to speak. I clutched at my side, barely able to breathe. A random, searing pain shot through my torso. I felt like I was going to pass out. Calla? Calla? Are you okay? Say something. Robbie rushed over to me, his face contorted with worry. I weakly returned his gaze. The agony was beyond anything I had ever felt before. It was as if someone had stabbed me with a white-hot fire poker and decided to twist it a couple of times for good measure. Excruciating was an understatement. Just as my vision was starting to go fuzzy, the pain began to dissipate. I gasped for air, leaning heavily on the counter for support. What the hell was that? I'm all right, I said, turning my head. Frank had joined Robbie behind the counter. The pair of them both had a look of deep concern etched into their features. If I wasn't dying, I probably would have found it endearing. Are you sure? You look like shit, Calla. That's it. I'm definitely charging him double. Gee. Thanks a lot, Frank. You're such a gentleman. Don't mention it, he said, never giving any indication that he was joking. Robbie and I both glared at him. Go sit down, Frank. You too, Mrs. Calla. You should probably take the rest of the day off. Don't worry, I can handle the shop, Robbie said, helping me to a chair. You know what? I think you're right. I could go for a nap. After resting for a little while longer, I went home. Robbie wasn't a professional by any means, but I trusted him to keep Aftermath running smoothly, at least until I recovered. He really was a good kid. I always thought it was such a shame that he died in such a tragic manner. Aids are no joke. I made sure to take it easy and get plenty of rest. I didn't experience any more phantom pains for the remainder of the day, but I knew that I would need to get a good night's sleep. With Claire gone, I'd be stuck on opening shifts for the foreseeable future. Yuck. I was almost done running through my tasks for the morning when it happened. A man approached the counter, his face obscured by a brown fedora. A sickly, yellowing newspaper was tucked beneath his arm as he placed a gloved hand on the countertop. His aura alone was sinister enough to make me want to turn and run. Beware. His gravelly voice sounded like his diet consisted solely of rusty nails and asphalt. I'd only heard that voice a handful of times before, and each instance made me sick to my stomach. Bubble, why? What's coming? The girl. With no further elaboration, he turned and reclaimed his regular seat at the back of the shop. I was shaking in my boots. Why, you might ask? Well, I told you a little white lie earlier. That thing that approached the counter is no man. He's been coming in nearly every day for as long as anyone can remember. But that's about all we know about him. No one knows what he is. No one knows how or if he died. No one even knows his name. We call him Nona, short for no name. And the only things I'm completely certain of in regard to him are, one, that he's benevolent towards the employees of Aftermath and its patrons, and two, that whenever he decides to speak, a terrible tragedy usually follows. There's no denying it. Nona is a bona fide, real-deal harbinger of death. I locked eyes with Frank, who wore the same bewildered expression that I did. His pallid features and wide eyes mirrored exactly how I felt at that moment. "What do you think he meant by that?" Frank murmured, never breaking eye contact. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it can't be good." "You got that right. Maybe it'd be safer to call in some backup on this one. I know Ivan's hopping between a couple different locations after landing the regional manager gig, but he'd be here at the drop of a hat if he caught wind of this, right?" "Yeah. Normally I'd try to avoid getting Ivan involved, but I think this is warranted. You remember what happened last time Nona spoke?" I said, a shiver rippling down my spine. Frank averted his gaze, the corners of his lips drooping into a frown. "I wish I could forget. That whole ordeal sent Kala?" "Kala, are you okay?" It had returned tenfold. My lower back throbbed with intense, pounding pain. It felt as if someone was hacking away at my spinal column with an ice pick. I was paralyzed. If I moved even an inch, I would be met with another agonizing shockwave of hurt searing through my system. This time was even worse than before. Before I could even grasp what was going on, everything started to get fuzzy around the edges of my vision. I could feel myself fading, and fast. The last thing I could remember before losing consciousness was Frank's husky voice shouting for someone to call for help. Then my mental fortitude finally crumbled, sending me spiraling into an inky black void. I awoke in a hospital bed. Frank was snoozing in a chair beside a burly, hulking figure. I was so shocked that I had to do a double take. Ivan's chair looked comically small beneath his gargantuan frame. Those things were not made to accommodate 7-foot-tall giants like him. I honestly hadn't expected him to show up. Commuting is a bit more of a hassle for the dead, after all. But whatever the case, Ivan's eyes lit up upon noticing that I was awake. "Kala, you are okay, yes?" "I made the trip as soon as possible," Ivan said, shuffling up to my bedside. I couldn't help but smile. He might have looked intimidating, but at heart, Ivan was just a big, Russian teddy bear. "Yeah, I think I'm fine now. I don't know what's happening to me. I keep getting this really strong, crippling pain out of nowhere. Thanks for coming, but how did you get here so fast?" "It's only been a few hours." A devious grin crept across Ivan's face. I pursed my lips. I knew that look. I hitch a ride on top of the car is an efficient way to travel. My mouth fell open. Ivan's bulky ass clinging to the roof of a speeding car going God knows how far over the legal limit. That's something I'd pay to see. Do you get everywhere like that?" "Everywhere subway does not go, yes." I opened my mouth, ready to scold him for being reckless, but thought better of it. Ivan was already dead. It's not like he could die again. "Okay, Evel Neville, let's step outside for a smoke break, and let Kala grab a nurse, yeah?" We want to get her back on her feet as soon as possible, Frank intervened, appearing at the foot of my bed. Ivan's mountainous body was so large that I hadn't even noticed him wake up. Yes. You have a cigarette, Ivan asked, that mischievous grin returning to his lips. Yep. Got one calling your name, buddy. Kala will be back in a few minutes, okay? I'd offer to catch someone's attention for you. But yeah, no. Kinda hard when no one can see us, Frank said, ushering Ivan out the door. That's very thoughtful. I should be able to manage. Don't take too long out there, I replied, flashing the pair of them a weak smile as they disappeared from view. I collapsed back into my bed. Why was this happening? I was beginning to think that I had pissed off some ancient, forlorn deity when the dots suddenly connected. How had I not realized it sooner? The person responsible for all this was standing in the doorway. All the color drained from my face, and my eyes grew wide as saucers. With a slight tremble in my voice, I called out to her. Claire. The pale girl with jet black hair loitering in the entryway smiled. A wicked, demented smile that I can't erase from my nightmares. In addition, she was carrying a voodoo doll, one that looked eerily similar to me. Miss me yet? Claire asked, slinking closer. Of course. Claire, you know that I had no other option. It was... Shut up, she shouted, producing a scalpel from her pocket and holding it to the doll's neck. It was there. I could feel the cold metal blade against my flesh. Claire wasn't playing around. I don't want to hear your excuses, Kala. You had your chance, she said, playfully wisping the scalpel back and forth. I wanted to scream. It was as if tiny razor blades were dancing across my throat. When you kicked me to the curb, you told me that my actions had consequences. Well, so do yours, Claire spat, leering down at me. This was it. I was convinced that I was going to die. Don't worry, she said, her enraged demeanor shifting. I'm not going to kill you yet. No, I just wanted to fill you in on what's to come. I'm going to stay true to my word, Kala. I'll make you pay for what you did to me for a long, long time. Claire giggled, removing the blade from the doll's throat. I gasped for air, coming to the realization that I'd been stifling my breathing. I trembled, turning to my psychotic ex-employee. She was smiling wider than ever. I really must be going now. It was great to see you again. Oh, and remember, I'll be watching you, Claire said, punctuating her statement by plunging the blade into the doll's leg, before skipping out the door. I shrieked in agony, desperately clutching at my throbbing calf. A couple of nurses rushed in and calmed me down, assuring me that everything would be okay. But honestly, I don't know if it will be. Because Claire is still out there, and she knows how to hold a grudge.